So picking up where we left off with the unknown dimensions of mind, with what we call no mind, which in fact is higher mind, which is a non-linear way of communicating, understanding, resonating with creation. This time we want to talk about dimensional selves and about that hologramic or helical alignment that I mentioned before. This is very circumscribed at the moment to planets, to a theory, and not applied to the human being. However, it is how the human being works. As above, so below. As below, so above. As within, so without. So hopefully we can understand a bit better what that alignment consists of, which is not a straight line. It is a helical alignment. If you've observed the movement of the whole solar system as a helix or a spiral that gyrates constantly and moves towards the center of attraction, which we can only surmise is the center of the entire universe, or what in esoteric terminology we know is the great central sun. So everything is ascending, spiraling, or moving towards that center, which we postulate as something as perfection, as a greater refinement of the matter or the composition of the universe. Now, these planets that gyrate constantly around the sun and in different distances, different speeds, are impressed upon our little planet and every human being that is born of the substance of the planet, which is what we are. Our bodies are composed of the earth, of the element earth in all its different aspects, impressed with the memory of humanity, in other words, our lineage. So this already makes for a great degree of individuality. If we look at our astronomical chart, astrological chart, we will see that two people born at the same moment, even instant, will have a slight variation within that moment or instance, or even if at the same time in a different part of the world, will have a different impression, different flow of energies that are going to condition this human being that is being born at that particular time. Also the elements of the ancestors, the history, the cultural influences, the planetary influences or trends of the time. Everything will mark that individual human being, which is each one of us, has been marked in a special, different, and unique way. Now, we know this, again I repeat, through the observations and the deductions made by scientists and mathematicians as to how our world comprising Earth and everything that surrounds it, and the influences of the ancestors, impregnate and relate to us, and therefore create a filter or a perspective of observation, of involvement with the universe around us. Now, if we were to conceive of ourselves not just from the center of where we are, here and now, within this physical body, and we could place our intelligence and observation in another configuration, we would be surprised to notice how different things appear to us. In our chemical alignment, this is what we're aiming towards. We're aiming towards a movable perspective, a mobile unit of consciousness that is able to embrace us, looking at the world from my human body configuration, mindset, emotional structure, etc., to the world. All the learning, the memorization, the experiences which have come into making me, into my particular window. Now, in alignment, I have a very clear picture of this window, and also I serve myself of the energy input that we visualize above us, which we know also is within us. So this is constantly helping me define the universe around me according to my perspective. Okay? We're also trained in changing perspectives, which I'm not so sure you do as much as you should, to allow ourselves to rise in consciousness and see ourselves and the world from a higher vantage point. Now what this means is vibrationally, this self will begin to accelerate vibrationally and rise to a perspective which in our studies is a dimensional one. And from there we perceive a greater vantage point, another angle of truth or a wholer truth. We are able to induce and provoke states of enlightenment, a solution to our problems, and we're able to envision ourselves as well, which is something I constantly urge you to do, is like really look at yourself from that higher vantage point and embrace yourself and love yourself. Now, what is this higher vantage point? Now, here's the problem. Because of the way we are trained and our education, and this is centuries of work closeted into my body as a conscious unit, I have little flexibility, if any, to conceive of other points of view. They will be different from the one I hold here, but they will still be mine. They will still come through that very same lens. Now, even within my own window or my own packaging, if you wish, I am tapping into other dimensions all the time. Now, most of the time I'm unable to, and I'm not speaking for myself because this is my training and my work, but I mean generally speaking for you. We are unable to discern what is one dimension from another, and ultimately it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because what we want is a higher perspective that will loosen the hold that we have or that matter has over us in this dimension. So we can, open up the space of this attachment, this identification with the form, with matter, with my personality, with my preferences. So little does it really matter in everyday life which dimension I am tapping into. Now, I've been speaking for a long time about 3rd, 7th, 10th as being the 3 levels at which we need to be flexible enough to move from one to another. And generally speaking, it is my personality, attached, identified, and defending in a way my territory, my beliefs, my inclinations, my objectives, my desires. The 7th would be a more wide perception of the world through, obviously, my own lens, as I said. But it would be more holistic. It would be more understanding. It would be more global. It would be very human, philosophical even. And we normally locate that in the heart. And I've said once, I've said many times, and I will continue to say till my dying day, it is not emotional. It is the intelligence of the heart. It is a sensitivity, which as a misnomer is called love, but it is not identified with human love, but with the love of all that is, with nature, let's say, with that greater force that draws us together and allows us to understand, to comprehend, to use a better terminology. And then there is this 10th dimensional experience for the human being, which is that normally associated with angelic light, silence, buzzing space, the sense of spaciousness, and is very, very little linked to our personality, other than it brings joy, it brings nourishment, it brings a reprieve, it brings a rest, and it's like a balm. It's as if we went to church and could communicate directly with that which church and religion represent. Spirituality without the labels, just as an experience of being enfolded, being permeated by that. So these are three levels of perception that we're fairly familiar with in our everyday lives without having to call them dimensional selves. They're three spaces or states. Now, if we were to remove ourselves from this framework of everyday life, and instead of receiving the dimensional information as perception in order to fit into this world, if we were to identify what I will be calling in this work we're doing, dimensional self, we would isolate the dimension and begin to experience it as living, being, breathing within that dimension. Not only that dimension in relation to me. Let me say that again. When we're talking of seventh dimensional self, we're talking of the Christ consciousness, the Christed or illumined human consciousness that sees things broadly, that sees things neutrally, that sees things in relation to one another, that sees things in the perfection that lies within that relationship, without isolating or preferring one or another. We see things intelligently with that intelligence of the heart. Now, if I were to transfer myself into that dimension, into that current of energy, I would begin to experience my body, my feelings, and my mind differently. I would be another, for lack of a better word, person, another entity. That world of the seventh dimensional world would unfold as a state of much more spacious and luminous, but filled with differences, filled with meaningful differences. My emotional state would not be related to my personal self, but would be almost like the breath I breathe of fluctuations in coloring. The world would have other people, would appear other people, but other people would not appear as we appear here. We would have a human aspect, but that human aspect would be much more translucent. It would be larger. The more we leave the third dimension, the more space, the less condensation of matter, and the more spaciousness there would be. And we're going to make experience of that dimensional self, because I believe it's very, very important for the work we're about to engage in after so many years of basic inner alchemy. The same thing would apply to the 10th dimensional self. We would not recognize ourselves. The relationship we have with the 10th dimension now is to imagine, most of the time it's imagined, or the intuition of an angelic presence. Now you guys have an advantage because for years you've been practicing our trips, our journeys, our energetic acceleration journeys, we call them aceleraciones, or intensifying of frequency. And in that journey, we have not stopped to identify what levels they are at, but you have been in touch with these enormous, luminous beings. Sometimes you have witnessed, you've experienced that, hey, I'm one of these luminous beings, that myself is emanating Now normally we change forms here. Maybe we would see ourselves as a sphere or a star. Or we would see that sphere or that star acting upon us. You've all had, every single one of you has had some experience of the sort. Now the people who have not participated of this training or done this work will also have that, as you will have this, in dreams, in states of meditation. And it's so blurry and there's so little information on it that we tend to discard it as illusory, as really imaginary or science fiction or so on. But it is a real human experience, and it is part of our human experience, which is what I hope to transmit, and that we're able to incorporate that information so that we can decode where we are, what is happening, and access much more readily, more clearly, the intelligence that is lodged in each one of these dimensions that are constantly interpenetrating us. The same way as our planet is revolving around the sun and our whole galaxy is moving in this helix through space, around the sun, and yet at different orbits, at different places, as we're going to see with a little video that we're going to show in a minute, which is readily available in the internet and in YouTube. There's many versions of it. So the idea again is, how does this relate to me? It is fascinating. We love seeing, all of us, we have this Facebook page where we post all this cosmic stuff and all these discoveries from the past, possible future, and we're all fascinated by it. Hey, did you see so-and-so? But we need to place all of that around us, or we need to take ourselves into that experience, because we're not excluded from it. Life is not a screen, and things projected upon a screen, or information that you obtain that remains at a mental level. It involves all of us, and it is happening to us, within us, and around us the entire time. Which is why I asked you not only to prepare by seeing the previous video, but also to discuss how has this alignment, this helical alignment, this no mind, other minds, affected you in the time since we had the previous meeting. How does this affect your life? How do you find yourselves responding to this? Now there's two people that I can immediately relate to who have had this experience every day. Anna, you're one of them with your thesis, with your doctoral presentation, with the notion of space, with forms, and you with your photography, Danny, the changes in perspective, how when you look at something, you have got to take into account light, but not just any light. There's gradations of light for you. Your world is all based on light and forms and shadows, and each one has a texture. And how does this, with a human being as a subject, come into play? Come into play through you and through what you photograph and transmit to the world, how you communicate to the world. And so each of you is using this in your filming, in your music playing. You're constantly interacting with different dimensions, integrated through the personal psychological self. However, you are also able to, only you have not recognized it, and you will now, you're also able to leave this self aside. Why is music such a balm for you and for us who listen to it? Because we stop being our common, ordinary selves, and we're transported into another world, another reality, another dimension, where space and color are different, where ourselves are different, where our relationship with one another is different. Why do we place this wonderful, beautiful music that incites beauty when we're with our loved one, when we're making love? It brings that other dimension, it brings it out in us, or it takes us there ordinarily, a normal, ordinary human being wouldn't care what dimension it is, as long as it's beautiful, as long as it makes you feel good. But for us it does matter. It does matter that we are able to point ourselves into those dimensions and out and through them, that we're able to invoke them, that we're able to operate in another dimension that will have its effect on the third. If we want to bring peace to the world, if we want to develop our service, or which we do within our group and at a distance, where we orient our minds through thought forms and project energies and influences that are going to be beneficial to the immigrants, to the conditions in war-stricken countries where we want to help. So it is not enough, for us anyway, to just be loving and open. Loving and open can spill all over the place. Loving and open can be, I space out, I can't take it anymore. I just want to blot out my intelligence. And what happens with blotting out your intelligence? You blot out all your access to higher forces and enter into a subjective imitation state. Okay? This is why drugs will also induce an altered level of consciousness, but they will not contact the level of consciousness itself, but your filter through which you experience. I remember, and I'm of course older than what I seem, my generational experience was there was a lot of drugs. And I took acid, LSD. And in acid, what happens to you, I also took peyote, all other kinds of things which were being explored in my generation. And what would happen to me was that my perspective would change. The color and the angles and everything. I remember my body, looking at my body in a mirror and having all these veins and arteries and going, yeah. You know, it's scary. It was scary when I first saw it, because it's like 3D, ultracellular, I don't know. It just alters your perception to such a degree that all your senses are involved in a finer detection of the forms, colors, and atmospheres that it creates. I was able to remember in the past as if I were in the present through a drug-induced state. But, which is what happens with lesser drugs that are being consumed today rather innocuously, as if it wasn't anything, or for other purposes, it was all my private world. And it was so private that I would see and understand, for example, my relationship to my father, which was rather traumatic, and the things from the past, and I would understand how they contributed to my present state. But once the drug had worn off, once those still, however, shamanic states have worn off, and you return to your normal configuration of energies, it took me months, maybe 6 months to a year, to be able to integrate in my personality and in my physical body the knowledge that was transmitted to me through that drug. So this is why drugs were always used very, very carefully under very knowing guidance, and in particular states in life where you could integrate and not create the division that they're still largely creating in the human psyche between the personal encapsulated self who believes it knows. And it does know up to a certain level. And that experience of reality here and now within your body, your personality, handled correctly, managed, administrated correctly, and your perception trained and conscious of the fluctuations in frequency that connect us to dimensional intelligence, other dimensional intelligence. In many shamanic traditions, you will be trained through the astral belt to perceive reality outside of your own skin, if you wish, adopting a protection animal or being trained in some technique that will allow you to perceive the human physical world from an angle that is not your own personal filter. Okay? But still, it would all be the lower dimensions. To reach this middle stage of the Christ self, or the higher mind, the intelligence of the heart, you would need to make a leap from dimensional linear thought to something non-linear. And here's where we touch upon what we touched upon before, the no mind. The no mind is the dimensional mind beyond the seventh. And that no mind has many different nuances. And that can only be experienced by a stable personality. A personality that has been integrated and is able to experience differences without cracking up, without breaking down, without being afraid that what it is perceiving and experiencing is a part of life. It is greater life. And this is why spirituality is so limited up until our present time. It is being expanded by people like yourselves who are having the courage to experience yourself in no mind, who are having the courage to experience what you are beyond your personality, and what you are even beyond the physical self. This is what is going to make, not quite yet, but what's going to make spirituality the tool through which we reach galaxies, other spaces, are able to communicate. Not because spirituality is goody-goody, but because spirituality is integrated in this light-dark universe we inhabit, in this condensation expansion, in this symphony or cacophony of sound that we experience at different times. So the time now is to mobilize ourselves rather than to think, oh, I can't handle that. I've got to find a refuge. I'm going to stay here. And many people need that refuge. Many people need that caring. But there are many people who are in it who can do much better. Who can go beyond and think in terms of not just global humanity, but global solar system, our galaxy. Because there is life. And there is intelligence at every single level of creation. Everything our telescopes can perceive, as well as our microscopes perceive, is life. But just because it doesn't talk and have 2 legs, 2 arms, and express itself like us, doesn't mean it is not intelligent. That it is not having it does not have a language, a message, an agreement, a resonance that blends in with everything else, creating a carpet, an invisible, sparkling, multicolored carpet. A texture that permeates the entire universe. And, as is said, this sun is going to die out in space, in time, and in space. Where does it go and what does it come? And again, we're fascinated. Wow! Where did we originate from? Well, that is happening all the time. Because we not only are capable of perceiving and relating through this intelligence and through ourselves onto the world, we're also able to break this down and assimilate intelligence at all levels. And we are eternal beings, not in this flesh and personality. So the sooner we're able to conquer beyond this linear approach to intelligence and consciousness, the sooner we will realize not only that we can communicate without, or let's say, a la part with the developments of technology. We will remember, we will know that I am. I have always been and always will be. And I am no different from you. Enough? So let's work on it now.